So, what does everyone know about the drama between Jasmine Lane and Rachel Gilmore? Nothing? Okay. Yeah, cool. Me neither. Let's talk about something else. Rage bait is 2015. May 9th, 2026. I am the comic reporter, and this is Kelly DeRidder.
I'd like to clarify a little bit the difference between the Norwegian Wealth Fund and the Canadian Debt Fund. The Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund they used assets from their resources and invested outside the country to create a fund for their citizens. The Canadian Sovereign Debt Fund is supposed to take debt, which they say will help boost our resources immediately, although the Norwegian Sovereign Fund took 36 years to build. I'm not really squaring the circle here. So what I would like, please, is for the member opposite to admit that it's actually misguiding Canadians to compare the Norwegian Wealth Fund to the Canadian Sovereign Debt Fund.
Well, Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
She is my MP here in the Kitchener Centre, a completely recovered alcoholic, or according to her, and a big opponent to the federal government being allowed to displace national debt onto the citizens who didn't benefit from the taxes they paid before, even a little bit, in the last, I don't know, 10 years or so. Yes, the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Thank you for the introduction, Kelly, and thank you for being a friend of the show. This is going to sound a little unhinged, but I'm not sure that telling Canadians that they need to pay more money to make up the misuse of the taxes they already paid in order to reduce the risk on businesses who don't want to build in Canada for the sake of everyone but themselves is the right way to go about gaining the trust of Canadians. The basic premise of this wealth fund is as follows. The government borrows money under the name of its citizens, and by that I mean uses taxes. It uses that borrowed money to invest in new businesses so they'll build in Canada, basically alleviating all of the risk. If the business succeeds, you get a little bit of a dividend in the business you invested in, and if it fails, you no longer have an investment and you're responsible for the borrowed money. Now, you're going to say, I mean, this is what happens. They always use my tax money to pay for stuff. And yeah, you're right, they do. But normally, when the government makes a bad investment, the worst thing that happens is they lose the money and now they have to find a way to cover it themselves, which usually means like higher taxes. So it bounces down on the taxpayers, anyways. But in the sovereign wealth fund, it's not even the government's name on the loan, it's the taxpayers. Now, if that sounds like a scam, that's because it probably is. It probably is. To set the record straight, if a financial planner with a personal stake in the success of your investments were to tell you that there was a high risk investment opportunity coming up and gave you the opportunity to invest whatever you could afford to lose in that upcoming project with a return that could massively outscale the investment, but you could also lose everything you put in, that is something you might do, maybe. And the reason you might do that is because your financial planner has a personal stake in your money's success. Plus, they also told you the truth and gave you the option to take the risk or not. That's fine. That's how financial planning works. But this isn't that. This is the federal government using your name to take out loans to get cash to invest in high risk investments they have absolutely no personal stake in because it's not their name on the loan, nor do they care if the business lives or dies because they aren't the ones covering the taxes. Uh, That's that's not how financial planning works. That's how the federal government's financial planning works. Financial planning has something called fiduciary responsibility. Financial planners are required to act in the best interest of their clients, and if they don't, they can lose their license and their businesses and their livelihoods. That's fiduciary responsibility. That holds them accountable. It actually makes sure that they're trustworthy. But guess who doesn't have fiduciary responsibility to their taxpayers? That's right, Doc. That's right. That's the federal government. The federal government doesn't have fiduciary responsibility to its citizens. They don't have a fiduciary responsibility to their citizens of their country to invest wisely and be held accountable when money is used in ways some might call reckless because they have the protection of Parliament. And that makes the sovereign wealth fund, as Carney calls it, an absolutely underhanded, unabashed, irredeemable scam. Think of this as boarding a plane when the pilot knows there's a good chance the aircraft is going to fail at 15,000 feet. So the airline gives the pilot the only parachute because the passengers should have somehow known to bring their own. Oh, and by the way, if you die, the airline gets your frequent flyer miles. So there's that. And for the record, I'm actually one of those weird outlier guys who thinks one of Canada's biggest problems is that it doesn't spend enough money on projects. I'm one of those guys. I think we're too busy nickel and diming our way into shared poverty because so much of our wealth goes into feeding the families of the 5,246 or so signature deployers required to get anything done in the country, which leaves a fraction of the taxpayer dollars to actually go to the project that we believe is important enough to spend taxpayer dollars on in the first place. Like if a project needs a $1 billion investment, we'll raise $1 billion, but by the time it gets to the project, there's only $250 million left. And the project never happens because there's not enough money to fund it. So everyone except the consultants loses everything they invested. I mean, it's kind of predictable. And that's actually our problem. That means we need $4 billion to fund a $1 billion project because daddy's gotta eat is the slogan of our finance department. Normally, I wouldn't hold someone's success against them, but this method of money management isn't even remotely close to money management. It's the United Way method of charity donation dispersion. And the wildest part about the whole thing is that if you consider the plane analogy, the plane that you boarded and is currently plummeting to its ultimate demise with you in it isn't even paid for yet. So your entire financial plan is based on a business you don't own, led by people who take no responsibility for their decisions, loaded onto a platform which, if it fails, is something you still have to pay for, even though you're dead. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So you're going to hear a lot of pushback on this list of obvious and observable problems with this perceived system of universal wealth creation, like, but Norway has a sovereign wealth fund and it is doing amazing. Yeah, yes, it is. Norway decided that instead of using all of its resource revenue to fund its officials and consultants, it was going to put away a portion of that money for a rainy day, just in case something bad were to happen and it needed to stop its citizens from dying. That some of that money goes into building new businesses if there is a downturn in economic activity because they have a pool of cash to draw from and lose nothing if a project fails because that's literally what the fund is for. It's a buffer to make sure they are never broke. But the real problem with this plan is the lack of an exit ramp for an unsatisfied investor. In the actual stock market, if your financial planner, or you, if you're smart enough, can watch your stock go up or down, and if you're not satisfied with the result, you just sell the stock. Yes, you can take a loss, but you got to say in how much of your investment you were willing to lose before you called it quits. And if your investor doesn't listen, they take a personal hit to their personal and financial reputation. Fiduciary responsibility. No, no, my friend. In this plan, you are all in until that business either hits the moon or ends up at the bottom of Mariana's Trench. You have no control because you are the one holding the bag, as declared by the federal government of Canada. Look, at this point, everyone in Canada knows that allowing other people to spend your money normally just ends up in you having less money with no idea of where the other half of your paycheck went, other than the odd parliamentary declaration of how great socialized healthcare is, even though you're watching this speech from a waiting room in a hospital you've been planted in for the past 16 hours and you haven't even talked to a nurse yet. In fact, let's take it even one step further into more relevance. Think of this as standing in line at the bank so you can try to explain how you're going to pay back that $5 million loan the government took out on your behalf to fund their underwater tap dancing startup, and none of it. I mean, if you don't like that idea, then you understand why the Sovereign Wealth Fund is something Kelly DeRidder believes might actually be a scam. We're going to say that word a lot from now on, by the way, because there's a lot of this that falls under that category. Now, am I being hyperbolic? Yeah, I am. a little. But you know what? I don't care. Is the attention economy itself a little hyperbolic? Yeah. I mean, was Rachel Gilmore being a little hyperbolic about being looked at a bar by two men she then took a picture of that they seemed to, you know, pose for and then declared her absolute terror and the threat to her life on a national podcast? I mean, yeah. Yeah, it's probably a little hyperbolic. And was the response from Jasmine Lane that 15 paragraph wall of words that she threw in our direction to explain her take on the situation a little hyperbolic? Yeah, yeah, it was. Very little way to deny that. I mean, the only thing you really had to say, she took 15 paragraphs to say trust but verify. The attention economy strikes again. So yes, the rage economy. Make everything so much worse than it is because if you don't, people not be able to tell you about how right you are. On the record, these completely not scripted little scraps are exactly how you get distracted from the actual issues, like the government stealing your money or how every independent platform is being abandoned by the humans because everyone is just a little tired of being mad. So when Kelly DeRidder says, hey, this sovereign wealth fund is completely funded by debt and actually might be a scam designed to incentivize businesses to build high risk investments that will likely fail on the customer's dime. That's not rage bait, that's true. But when Rachel Gilmore says, I was literally followed into a bar by two Nazis who could have killed me if I hadn't thought quickly enough to talk to them of my own accord because that's how scared I was, yeah, that's probably rage attention bait. And for trust but verify, that's good advice. Jasmine gave you good advice, just in a very hyperbolic way. Hold off on the anger. Not one of us has a single extra brain cell in these heavily rotted craniums of ours to waste, and to be honest, the further into the attention economy you fall, the more legitimate problems you miss. Just because you perceive something as a threat doesn't mean it is, and just because something seems like an opportunity for wealth doesn't mean it is. Always verify. Never commit without verification. And most especially, don't buy into the idea that anyone has your best interests in mind unless they are willing to tell you you're wrong. And then prove it. Just ask Kitchener's favorite recovered and honorable minister of parliament about that.